Hello everyone. So this is on how to use Parsec with Unity, specifically Unity Rewired. I'm not affiliated with Parsec, however I worked closely with them to integrate Parsec into my game, my Unity Rewired game. So shout out to Skippy, thanks for all the help with that. So this tutorial is basically going to go through and talk about different methods of using Parsec in your game. So these are the different topics we're going to be taking a look at. So first we'll just talk about what is Parsec and Rewired and what we use it for. Parsec works good for a lot of games, but not for every type of game. So then we're going to talk about just using the Parsec app versus integrating the API and SDK into your game. If you're just using the Parsec app, it's basically plug and play. If you're integrating into your game, well, you got to use the API. We'll then talk about basically what you need, so to download the accounts that you'll have to set up at the start, and testing with the existing Parsec Rewired example. So there is an existing Parsec Rewired example online, and I'll open that up and show you how to set that up and go through it. However, it is lacking a few features that we would want. For example, you have to Alt-Tab the game and enter the code in a website. So the final goal that we're going to have is it integrated into our demo without the need to Alt-Tab. So we're going to then make our own after we use the setup after the Parsec Rewired example, and then at the end I'm just going to show a demo of an advanced integrated example basically in our game. So to start off, let's just talk about first quick what is Parsec and Rewired and what it can be used for. So Parsec is a streaming service, and what a streaming service is that the host is the one that runs the actual game and then sends the camera renderer information over to all the network clients. So instead of there being two different instances of a game, like in a normal multiplayer game, where both games are pretending to be the same game by sending each other information about inputs and things, in this scenario, only the host is actually playing the game, and it's simply doing a screen share to all the clients. So the clients are sending back controller information, and if you implemented the API, you would be receiving that controller information and plugging it in as if it was local input in a sense. Alright, so because you're sending over camera renderer information every frame or over periods of time as opposed to sending simply just input, which is how most games work, it's going to have heavier than normal network traffic. So a good host upload speed is generally required. Parsec, however, is decently lightweight for what it can do. So what is Parsec good for? Well, it's great for games that are local couch co-op games. Games where everyone sees the same information or sees from the same camera. So if you had an FPS, for example, where each player is seeing from a different camera, that's not suitable for Parsec or, well, any streaming service for the most part. That is because the host would have to render every camera and then send out the data to each individual client. And that would just be way too expensive for the host to calculate. Cameras are expensive to calculate. So what about, well, Rewired? What is Rewired? Well, Rewired is an asset from the Unity Asset Store for handling input. Back before Unity's new input system had come out, it was one of the only alternatives that could handle controllers, especially the DirectX issues that some of you may experience with controllers, where the controllers will swap, or the triggers will be the wrong triggers. Like the R trigger might be the R trigger for player 2, even though you're holding controller player 1. This is an old DirectX issue that I think I've heard is handled in the new input system for Unity, but I've been using Rewired for ages. I heavily recommend it. It's a fantastic asset. And Parsec has built something to integrate with Rewired, so they work together very well. Alright, so Parsec is great for couch co-op games because you can just make the game and then send the camera render information over. You don't really have to sync up anything in your game. You don't have to worry about desyncing or anything like that. There can be lag spikes and things like that, and there's a few tricks we can do to lower that. Now, you may have heard of some other streaming services, such as Steam's Remote Play. Parsec is an excellent alternative to Steam Remote Play because, in general, I have had very tough experiences with Remote Play. The quality was always really bad, there was always tons of lag, and there was massive amounts of artifacting. It is truly incredible how little Parsec has of artifacting and of lag. It's quite a strong service. Alright, so that means we're going to be moving on to the next topic. We're going to be talking about using the Parsec app versus integrating into your game. So, alright, so the Parsec app is basically that. It's an app. It's an external app just like this. And with this app, you can share your screen or an app which is currently running to your friends. So you would host your screen just like TeamViewer or something like that, and then they would join, and just like that they could play. So you don't even need to program it into your game. As long as your users are aware that Parsec exists and they download it, well, they can just use it. You can even host your games onto the arcade. So that's kind of funny. So you could host your games onto the arcade, and then people can just join and play. And now you can see the style of game is like those couch co-op games or fighting games, and that on its own is pretty impressive because a fighting game requires very little lag in order to be fun. If there is lag and one of the players, his input's not taken, that is super unenjoyable. So this just kind of shows the strength of Parsec. Okay, so that is with the app. Now you're here probably because you want to know about integrating the API SDK into the game itself. So to integrate Parsec into the game means that although we do have to have Parsec installed for the clients, you don't have to Alt-Tab out of the game or use external software. It's also much, much faster because it's directly getting information from the game as opposed to, a hardware route where it has to record your screen. So you're just going to be sending the render or texture information over the network directly. And I find it has much better audio control. And I've definitely noticed it's simply just faster, clearer, more responsive, even though it is pretty good with just the app on its own. Alright, so now we're going to do the step where we just set everything up so that we can probably go through the rest of the tutorial. So, you're going to need to go onto GitHub, Parsec Cloud SDK, this one here, and you can also just Google Parsec examples GitHub, and you'll probably end up here. And you're going to end up with the Parsec SDK and examples that you can use. And, there's a bunch of reading here that can help you out a bunch. So, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to download the project. And you could do so by clicking here and downloading, or cloning it onto your GitHub so you can clone it into your project. For simplicity's sakes, I'm just going to download it right now. Okay, so I have it downloaded, and then inside examples, you are going to see our several different examples, and we're going to be taking a look at Unity Rewired. Alright, but we're going to get the other things set up first. So you're going to need to get a GameID from Parsec. If you want to use Parsec for your game, you will need a unique GameID. The best way is either to email them at their website, so parsec.app. Join the Discord. The Discord is great. There is tons of support in the Discord. That's how I mostly learned how to use Parsec. So if you go into there and you're interested in incorporating Parsec, you'll talk to them there and they'll tell you how to get a GameID. Alright, also of course, download the app. and make an account. Now, I would suggest making several accounts. I have 3 accounts, which I use to test. You can test even the accounts on the same computer or multiple computers, but that's obviously going to be an important step. All right, and lastly, last step, we are now going to start going towards, well, using the Unity Rewired example. Alright, so now we're going to go through and open the existing project for Parsec, go through it, understand it, extract the things of value, and bring it into our own projects. So, this is what we downloaded off of the GitHub. I'm going to go into Unity Hub, I click Add, and I'm going to add the existing project in Examples, Unity Rewired, and we'll add this folder here. Now, if you are not using Rewired, you can open up Unity instead and mostly follow along. It's just going to be the step in which we do the key bindings, in which we bind the Rewired controller. That's going to be different. So I'll open up Unity Rewired, and then we'll press Select. And the version that it is expecting is 2017.4.32. Now, I've been using 2020.1.17 with Rewired, and it seems to be working just fine. So, feel free to go up to at least this version. I haven't used any version above, so I can't speak for those. Alright, and you'll open it up. It'll ask you, do you want to upgrade your project, of course. You say yes, and then we open that up. Alright, so we'll load up the project and instantly be greeted by a bunch of compiler errors. So the first one is about Rewired. So this project uses Rewired, but does not have Rewired included in the demo project. And that's because Rewired is a paid asset that you will need to purchase. So, of course, owning Rewired, I go to Window, Package Manager, and go to My Assets, and then go to Rewired. I can just go up here and type it, since too lazy to search something alphabetically. And then we have Rewired here. Now you're going to want to use the newest version of Rewired. One of the old versions of Rewired did have problems with this, but you download the new one and you'll be fine. Okay, so because this is a sample project, I'm just going to download all of it, even though there's demo stuff in here. Let's just double check. Although, yeah, we can take off examples. There we go. And documentation. The website's plenty fine. So I'll press import. And we'll import Rewired into our project. Now, if you are not using the newest Unity, or 2020, I think it changed in like 2019 or something, you just open up the asset store instead and import it through the asset store. Alright, so now Rewired is imported for us. So we'll move on to the next compiler error. So the next compiler error, it says the type of Parsec gaming could not be found. And there's going to be a bunch of those errors right here. Alright, so all the Parsec stuff is missing, and that's because, well, we need to import the DLLs and things into our project. So we open up our folder, the folder for the thing we downloaded from Git. So we have the full project here. In examples, that's where our Unity Rewired examples and such are. Now in SDK, we open this up, and then there are different platforms. So these all contain DLLs that belong to the different platforms. We are just going to be building for Parsec Unity. Yes, there is Windows, but Windows more means like not Unity Windows. So we're going to be doing Parsec Unity. So we open this up, and we get a bunch of files here. And by the way, you'll notice a lot of readmes hidden throughout everywhere. These readmes actually are very useful. That's how I learned, for the most part, that and the Discord. Very useful. So we're just going to do the runMeFirst.bat is the batch file, and it's going to copy the DLLs into the appropriate locations. Alright, so a little quick side note. I'm about to do a step which is going to break some components, and then I'm going to, over the next several minutes, be fixing those components. However, I've been told that there is a way to do it without breaking the component, so I'm just going to show that way quickly, and you can try it out. And if it doesn't break, then you can skip the next few steps. If it does break, then you can just do it the manual way that I'm about to do. So inside this folder here, I'm going to run this batch file. But the first thing I'm going to do is close Unity. So close Unity, run the batch file, open Unity, click on the main camera, and the Parsec StreamerFull on the main camera component here should look like this with a GameID and on-user authenticate. If it says null or missing or something like that, well, that just means that it did become corrupted, and the next step, just continue with the tutorial, and it'll all make sense how to fix it. Alright, so now we'll go back to the original video, where I manually copy over the batch files and manually fix the component. So I'm just going to run it, and it's saying like, hey, don't. You click more info, you run anyways. Alright, so now you're going to notice that some of these DLLs have popped up. I'm going to grab these DLLs, Control-C, copy, go over to my project, and in here, and we'll paste them in here. Let this reload. Oh, now we get the Rewired installation recognition because probably we don't have compiler errors for the first time. So we press proceed. Alright, and then it's going to ask, do you want to add new entries? And we're going to just say yes. And control mapper, we don't need that, so we're going to skip it. We also don't need the on-screen touch controls or the documentation while it's online. And here is just explaining how to start it up. Alright, so now we have 0 errors, and we're in a better spot to begin. However, first, we're just going to double check the Rewired. So I'm going to open up the Rewired Input Manager, and it has no data files associated to it. Data files are null. So we're going to go back to our location where the SDK was. So we're going to go back upwards to our SDK, Parsec Unity. We're going to grab the Parsec Rewired Input JSON, and we're going to copy this, and we're going to go put this back into our project. Just going to paste it here. For the sample project, I'm not going to really make proper folder hierarchies or anything like that. Alright, so we're going to click on our Rewired Input Manager. We're going to look at it and see that the data files is null. That's why we can't click this button. So we're just going to click the little circle here and link it to the asset that's already in the project. And then we can launch Rewired. So we're going to launch Rewired, and the first thing we're going to do is click on Tools. We're going to import data, and we're going to import that JSON that I copy-pasted in here just a moment ago. So I'll double-click it, I'll import, I'll overwrite, and close. Now you may not need to do that. I just do, it might actually already be included in the project, but better safe than sorry. So go to custom controller maps, and there's Parsec controller, Parsec keyboard, Parsec mouse, and we're gonna assume that you guys are familiar with Rewired. If not, there are excellent YouTube videos online. It's a bit of a complex software, but it is fantastic. Now, for those familiar with Rewired, you have your joystick, your keyboard layouts, and your mouse layouts, and these are all local. And then you have your custom controllers. And what makes a custom controller special is that it is a controller just like any of these, but it does not take input from hardware. Instead, you as the programmer tell it what buttons are pressed. So in code, for example, you'd be like, oh, the A button is pressed, or oh, the S button is pressed. So it's like a controller, but you fill the data. And the end goal is going to be that over the network, we're going to be passed information, like AS was pressed, and we're going to bind it to our custom controllers so that when buttons are pressed and passed over the network, we're going to fill our custom controllers with that input. Alright, so now Rewired is set up. We have no compiler errors, and we can begin with this. So I'm going to click 2D, and we're going to just go to Canvas. So double click on Canvas, and we can see everything. And now we're going to launch and play our little test scene. I'm going to run. Oh, I'm just gonna mute. Okay, and you're going to notice that there's an error here, that we have an argument out of range exception. And if I were to double click on it, I can't double click on it. If I were to click on it and follow the stack trace, we see that the error in terms of the code we can reach happens in player movement 22. That is because joystick 0, I do not have a controller plugged in. So I need to plug in a controller in order for this not to crash. Now, of course, if you want to build a game where you don't use controllers, well, you'll see what I'm talking about when we look at the key bindings, how to solve that. So I have my controller plugged in now, so I'm going to stop this from running. I'm going to clear, and I'm going to play it again. We will be able to move our player around. And on the video, you may notice that it looks like it's jittering, that the character is jumping a lot. That's only because I'm recording at 20 FPS in order to keep the file size down. It's actually very smooth on my screen. So I'm now going to try to go through the flow, but we're going to have other errors we need to solve. So the flow would be, we are going to request a code, then we are going to use that code online to authenticate the game. Then, once the game has been authenticated online, we are then going to start Parsec. Once Parsec has started, the game is officially online, and a join link will be given to us. We give that join link to other people, the clients, and then the clients will use that link online or in the Parsec app to join the game. Now, if this workflow doesn't really seem appealing to you, don't worry. This is just for the example, and it's important to understand how the bare bones Parsec SDK works, because we're going to emulate this through code later, and we're going to make it so that you don't have to Alt-Tab. Now, it's not going to work though. We still have other runtime errors to solve. The is first when we press request code, we're going to get this null reference exception, and if I click on this, we're going to have the streamer be null, because we have a null reference exception here, and the only thing that exists here with is a reference type variable is the streamer. If we go up to it, we'll take a look, and it says streamer equals gameObject.find main camera.gameObject get component parsec stream general. Now the parsec stream general is a parent class of two other types of streamers. And the streamer class is like one of the most important classes. It handles a lot of the core logic. It knows that the guest state has changed, if a guest has connected or disconnected. It also handles like getting the invite URL, starting Parsec, stopping Parsec, and it also is the one that sends information over the network, like input or the the camera renderer. It sends the renderer information over. So that's null, and that's null because if we go to main camera where it says it should be, we click main camera, and we'll notice that the script is delinked and broken. Now, early on in the earlier steps, we opened the project with compiler errors, we copy-pasted DLLs over, so that ends up just breaking this. Now for you, maybe it's not broken, which would be great, but for a lot of you, it will be broken. So we need to replace it. So we're going to replace it with the script called Parsec StreamerFull. So Stream General is the parent class, and Camera and Full are the children class. Full is the one you want if you're a beginner because it does everything for you. It will transfer over the camera renderer information, and it will also transfer over the audio information. For camera, for Parsec Stream Camera, that one is more advanced. It has just the render information. You have to manually handle the audio and that sort of thing. We're just going to start with Parsec Stream Full. And now there's a GameID and event system. So for the GameID, unfortunately that GameID is now gone. And if you want to get it, you can go on the Discord and get it. You can just copy paste what I'm about to copy paste, and I can show you how to get it yourself. In this case here, I've changed the scene, right? So if I show an Explorer and I go to my scene, Parsec sample scene, and I edit it in Notepad++, and I just search for GameID. There's a GameID here. Because I haven't saved the scene yet, I haven't saved the changes, so it's still in there even though it's a broken link, the variable is still there. So then I just go to main camera and I paste it in there. Now this is the GameID that I was talking about earlier. This GameID here is a sample GameID that Parsec has for this sample project. Now for your own game, you would want your own GameID. And you would get that GameID by contacting Parsec through their Discord or email, telling them what your game is, and they will give you back an ID that you can use, a unique identifier for your game. Alright, so next we're going to have to link the event system here, because that also got delinked in that whole shenanigans earlier. So I'm going to press the plus button, and then I'm going to drag and drop the game manager onto it. And then we're going to use the dynamic function in the game manager script called authentication poll. So game manager has authentication poll, and basically this function will be called every couple of seconds online by Parsec, and it will contain information about the authentication process. So if you're pending, if the code's been approved, if it's been, has it expired, and things like that. It's also going to pass this important data package that we're going to be using for other steps. Alright, so let's run it and follow through the steps that we have here. First step, request code. Request code. Next step, use the code online to authenticate the game. So I'm going to open Notepad here, and I'm going to grab this and copy it into here, and grab this and paste it into here, just so you can see that it is a hyperlink. So if you're going to be testing often, you're going to be copy pasting often at this stage, so you might want to do what I did, which is I just merged two of these into one UI field, so it's easier to copy paste. And then even easier than that is with Unity, it's actually quite easy to add things to your clipboard. So I just programmed that whenever I press request code, it copies it to my clipboard, opens Chrome, and then I can just paste it in myself. Actually, you can actually have it just open Chrome with the URL already, so you can make your testing process easier because you're going to be doing this a lot. Alright, so we're going to open up, paste this online, and here it's asking, it wants us to now authenticate to approve. So we press approve. And once we have approved, we can just close this. We can go back into Unity. And you'll notice that the panel up here has changed. Before we were on the authentication panel, and now we're on the Parsec control panel. So now we can decide whether or not this should be a public game. We can start Parsec, and it will give us a join link. Now if we do public game, people will join your game. A public game will be put on the arcade. And trust me, you think no one would join a test game, but people will join your test game. So we're just going to make it not public, so that way it's easier for us to join, easier for us to control. And we are going to press Start Parsec, and then we are given a URL. So that's the next step here. We have now been given a join link, and the game is now public or private. It's now hosted. So with the game being hosted, we can give others this join link. And like I said, if you don't like this workflow because of, you have to copy, paste, and pass it to people, we're going to integrate it in when we make our own in the next part of the example. We're going to integrate it so you don't have to do that. So I'm going to copy paste this, and then we give it to our client for them to join. Now our client can join in this stage in two different ways. They can either join through online. Basically in here they would paste, and then when they do this they can play. Now this is not very recommended. And the reason that it's not recommended is just because it's a lot slower when they're doing it through a browser. Very often an error pops up, and if you were to Google that error code, it generally just says, please use the app instead. It's just much better to use the app. So I'm not going to use this. Instead, I'm going to do it through the app. So we have the app open. You go to Computers, and then here is where you paste the join code. Now, to test properly, what I recommend is having two different accounts. Now, I had authenticated using my this account here, my little astronaut, and this account here is using a different email. It's a different account, and that way the two of them can try to join each other. Now, you might run into some errors where the two accounts need to be friends and things like that, and you have to add each other as friends. So, if that happens and you can't get past it, you can ask people on the Discord. If you still can't get past it, then just for the initial testing phases, use the same account, because the same account won't have troubles connecting to itself. But you'll have to deal with that problem eventually. So I'll paste it into here, and then I will join. And just like that, we have now joined. So, there are now two characters. And because that's a little bit loud. Sorry, I'm just gonna. Oof, that was a little bit loud for me. Alright, so there are now two characters. I'm just gonna minimize this. And we'll minimize this. Okay. And if in this game I were to move around, you'll notice I'll move around in the other game. Now, I can't move around in this game yet. Sorry, I'm tacking on this correction. The reason that I can't control both characters at the same time is because in the app I don't have play in background on. So when I click on the Parsec app, it unfocuses Unity, causing Unity to pause. So therefore, I can't control the character. If I toggle that, I should be able to control the character on the same computer, although both of them will read the same inputs, so there'll be a bit of confusion as the inputs fight each other. I generally always have a laptop open next to me, and I'm testing on both, which is the best way to go, because if it works on your computer, it doesn't mean it's going to work across both computers. That issue I had mentioned before about the friend and private stuff, that had been one of the issues I discovered when trying to work on the laptop versus all on one computer. Alright, so now that we have this, the testing with the existing Parsec Rewired example working, we're going to work towards making our own Parsec Integrated demo from scratch. So that way we can integrate it into our games instead of having to build our game around the demo. So after that step, that's when we're going to look at the advanced example, and the advanced example is when we're going to bypass the problem of alt-tabbing out of our game. So first, what we're going to do before we create our own project to integrate from scratch, we are going to take a look at the existing example, so that way we can understand the code flow and how it works, so we can extract it and bring it into our own project. In order to do that, we're going to open up the Game Manager. And we're going to take a look at how it works. And I'll point out some of the important functions. Okay, so we'll just go through the flow together. First of all, it's grabbing the streamer. Now the streamer is attached to the main camera. Now, since you are probably going to be using the Parsec StreamerFull, you will want to attach this to the main camera. The Parsec StreamerFull, both sends the camera render information over the network, but it also sends the audio information from this audio source. At the moment, all the audio which will be played through this audio source will be sent over the network. So if you want to send over audio that's not played from this audio source, which obviously you're going to want to do because it would be very difficult to filter everything through this one audio source, we'll look at that later in the advanced examples. But for now, this is the setup that we'll have. So you, of course, can just link it. You don't have to specifically do this code. And we are going to add, during the awake, during the initialization, we are going to add the guest connected. Now, I don't like checks like this. You would always want something more like this. You should never have something that checks if, but if it's required, if the rest of the program is going to crash, you always want to kind of output that it's broken. So anyways, so the streamer guest connected, we're going to add this function to guest connected and add this function to guest disconnected. What are these functions? Control click or F12, and these are the arguments: object sender and the guest. So we can always control click and take a look at these classes, and this is what's inside the guest. It's like the owner, name, IDs, things like that. And the object, the sender, isn't used in this context. So if a guest connects, we are going to bind the keys. So I had mentioned earlier about Rewired and what a custom controller was. So a custom controller is just like a normal controller. So, for example, these joystick and keyboard and mouse layouts are for our local input and it detects it from hardware. These custom controllers are emulations of these. Basically, they are the same mappings. Alright, so if you click on Custom Controller Maps, you'll see Parsec Controller, Parsec Keyboard, Parsec Mouse, and in here are all the inputs that we'll receive over the network, fill inside, and then we will read this input to make our characters and such move in the game. And you just got to make sure that these maps match these maps here. Alright, so here is the steps for creating the three types of custom controllers we have: the controller, the keyboard, and the mouse. So we use reinput.controllers.create custom controller 0, so ID 0, and then give it the Parsec guest ID. Source controller ID, this ID corresponds to, if I recall, we open this up, custom controllers, this ID here. So 0, 1, 2. If these aren't in the correct order, these IDs are the ones that matter. Okay. So, once we create the three controllers, then we assign the controller to a user. So that's the binding stage. So luckily, Parsec takes care of all of this for you. So what we have is assign custom controller to user. We give it the guest, and we give it the controller. And then we do the same for the keyboard. And then we'll notice mouse is missing. Now, this is kind of old since I worked with this example, so I don't remember if it's just because it's actually missing or When we look at the advanced example later, the integrated example, we'll check it out then. So we have spawn player, and now inside of spawn player, we have where we look through our array of players. So this isn't Parsec or anything. This is just their own script. They made this thing called the player manager, and the player manager is like a wrapper around the player, each individual player. It's not a manager of all the players. Like for each player has a player manager is the way that they did it. They instantiate a new object, so that is just the player object prefab. If we take a look at their prefab, it is just everything with a player movement script. The player movement script is some script here. I guess we'll take a look at it when it's important. So we assign a bunch of information, probably better done with like a constructor, like this constructor here, setup. Might as well pass it in there instead of doing it outside. And then when we set up, we are just saving some information. Now, we have the 3 controllers being passed. And here we are calling again assign custom controller to user. Now you'll notice that we already did that earlier. We did that here, and then we go into spawn player, and then we do it again. Now that's just something I've noticed. I don't know if it's necessary, but I'll check my advanced example later to see if I also do it twice. But you know, you could always comment it out and see if it crashes. But they do it twice. So once that's there, once that's done, it then grabs the player and sets up the player. So that was the player manager. We just did this code twice basically inside player manager. And then we set up the player itself. This is the mono behavior on the player. And what we had just done here is we have done Parsec code. We have assigned a controller to a guest, and basically when the guest passes information over the network, that is going to be filled into this custom controller. So that was Parsec setup. Now we're going to do some rewired setup. So we then go into the setup, and we have Parsec input assign guest to player. Let's see if I can remember what this was about. Okay, that was just assigning a player ID to a guest. Now, what is the value that we're assigning? Well, I don't know. We didn't pass it in the setup, but it was done externally, if I recall. That's why I don't like that sort of external setup. Int player, and that comes from iPlayer, get free player. Okay, so that's just like an index. So, I mean, you can probably just use the guest ID or something like that, if I recall. So, inside of here, alright, so now we're doing the rewired setup. And what we do for that is inside the initiate reinput, we are going to get a player by player ID, and that player and player ID corresponds to rewired input manager players, and it's these players here. Now this number 1 is not the player ID, that's important. It's this here, 0. So these players here are the players that we are getting from IDs. Alright. So if player equals 0, we are not doing anything related to Parsec, because that is a local player. That local player, we know it's a local player because if I go into players, player 0 has this joystick map, and that's the normal rewired joystick map. However, these players do not have joystick maps, they have custom controller maps instead. So these are the online players, and this is the local player. So, if the controller does not equal null, we should probably throw some warnings or something instead of just checking like that. But we are now doing rewired controllers.add controller. So we had created in code a custom controller earlier, and then now are giving those custom controllers to Rewired to add it to their system. So a player has joined, we create custom controllers, we link it up with Parsec, and then we link it up with Rewired. So Parsec will give data. Because of the binding we did earlier, Parsec will give data to the custom controller, which will set the values like A is pressed, up is pressed. And then that controller is linked to Rewired, so when we use Rewired and get like the input from a player, well, it's linked. Okay, and we do true, remove from others. Okay, so that is the entire binding step. So that is that is all the steps in order to do your key bindings. Alright, so now that we've seen how to bind player controls, we're going to take a look at the other functionality working in the background in order to integrate Parsec into our game in a way that we don't have to Alt-Tab. So we're going to take a look at these steps here and see how it happens in code so we could emulate it ourselves. So the request code stage. Now first stage, request code, happens when we press the button, request code. So very easily we can take a look at the button and it's called get access code. When we press get access code, we call streamer.requestCodeEndPoll. Once we call that, we will receive this session data, and also every couple of seconds now, it will call authentication poll, which will tell us the current stage, if we are waiting for users, if the code has been approved, if it's been invalid or whatnot. So the data that comes back in there has the verification URI. So this is the first part here. It's usually just this. The user code, which is usually this. And then status field is just them writing a status field. Alright, so that will give us that information. Of course, we can just save that information ourselves. We can even save the session data if we want. So we can just save that information in our code somewhere. And we want to do, well, the next step with that information. So the next step would be to use the code online to authenticate the game. Now, this is one of the more tricky steps to get around. The rest are a lot simpler. This is probably going to be the toughest or most challenging step. Alright, so I'm going to show it how we did it in our game. So I'll show you the flow. Now the flow is, the UI especially, is a work in progress, but the flow itself is pretty stable. So I'm just going to show the flow. We press play, whatever, go to the main menu. A little bit of loading time there. Okay, multiplayer. Alright, so there is the host and the people who are joining. So the hosting process is the process we're talking about here at first. So first of all, the ability to request a code, we saw that we can very easily just do that in code, right? Like it was simply a button that called get access code. So that step is fine. Oops, sorry, just move some tabs around. So next is to use the code online to authenticate. And like I said, that's the tricky one. So it is, in order to authenticate, as you saw, we had to log in. And it is against Parsec's company policy, for good reason, that you cannot store usernames and passwords for Parsec services. So if we did have the username and password, we could actually authenticate straight online through some web calls, but obviously people could be malicious with that information. So instead, what I've decided to do to make sure that users do not have to Alt-Tab is use an in-game browser. So when they host, they choose a sample game and there's some settings. And Parsec, since it is a streaming service, it is very heavily dependent upon resolution. The more resolution, the more network traffic. The host, you should warn them that the host should try to use a lower resolution, because if they have a 4K monitor, it's just going to lag for everybody. Alright, So I've integrated some Steam stuff, but you can make it a public arcade game, a friends only game, that sort of thing, and host. So when I host, I open an in-web browser, which is the Parsec website. And this is where they would log in. Now the annoying part is that the annoying part is that autocomplete and such doesn't seem to be working. I used ZF Browser. That is the app, the app I downloaded from the asset store to do the embedded browser. It doesn't save passwords, so they have to manually enter it each time. We'll see in the future if there's going to be a way that we can reduce the strain of this step, but only the host will have to do this. The client won't have to. Alright, so I'm just going to go find my password. Alright, and then we're going to log in. And it's going to do the authentication process. Now that's only, no, they'll have to log in, I think, each time, because the ZF browser doesn't save any information. So if you can find a browser, an embedded browser which like saves the information or like somehow incorporates Chrome or something, that would work a lot better. So we approve, and now the game has been approved. So the next step is the starting of the Parsec. So start Parsec was also simply a button. So in a Rewired example, in the Parsec control, there was a start Parsec, which called GameManager.startParsec. So we open up our Game Manager, and we look for start Parsec. And the code was basically this. We give it the max number of players, if it's a public game or not. Now, a public game for Parsec means, is it on the arcade store or not? If it is public, anyone can join. Unity game name, the description, and the session ID. The session ID is the authentication ID. What is the authentication ID? Well, on authentication poll, when the code was approved, we were given sessions result data. Inside of there is ID, host peer ID, user ID, roles, expires. There's information that we can use, one of which is, well, ID. We pass that to start Parsec, and it will start the session. Once the session starts, we call streamer.getInviteURL, passing in the authentication data, and it will give us a string, which is the invite URL that we copy paste to other people. So that would be this next step. A join link will be given to you. Now we have to give the join link to others. So we obviously don't want to have to copy paste that and send it to other people, like Alt-Tab and everything. Our users are either going to use the app or they're going to use the integrated system. They won't use like a mix of the two. So what we'll do, or what we've done for ours, and you can do for yours, is that the clients who go to join will see the games listed in a server list. So what information do clients need to join? Well, they need that join URL. So that join URL we uploaded to a server, and then the clients, when they refresh, they can find the games, and when they click join, they will join the game. Okay, and also we did things where we did like search with friends, so it's like Steam friends only, or public games, or non-public games. All of that's like in the backend inside of our game here. So what's the next step? Well, the next step that we saw is give join link to others. So we did that. This here, I mean, you can't see it, but the join link is in code stored behind. So then the next after that is have the client use that link online or in the Parsec app. Now, like I said, we don't want to have them copy-paste it into the web browser, and we don't want to have them copy-paste it into the app. Now, we do want them to use the app, though. The app is the good thing. So what we've done is something simple like this. When somebody clicks the button to join that particular user's game, what we are going to do is we are going to launch the Parsec app and run it with the join link in here. To do that, this is the executable path you need to use. So Parsec has included, I forgot the name of it, It's awesome though because you don't have to have the actual path, but this will be the executable path. It's parsec this. We have the peer ID. The peer ID is part of this join code. So this join code is, well, the join code that we saw earlier, and when I click on that button, I get the join code that I got from the server. And it is in this format. This is peer ID and this is secret. Now secrets are for non-public games. In order to join a non-public game, you need to be passed the secret. And you'll be passed that as part of the join code and everything. So this is what we do. And then we set our Unity scene to application. Okay, so to clarify, remember that Parsec is a streaming service. So that means that when I launch this game to join my friend's game, my game isn't running anymore. I am instead running the game through the Parsec app. Streaming services are not two games which send each other information. They are one game which sends render information over. So our Unity game is still going to be running, but we don't need it to be. So we're kind of just going to put it on an empty scene and minimize it. And then we're going to open the executable and run this instead. So here. Okay, so I'm going to run in background mode. I'm going to set it to windowed mode so it doesn't like just do this old alt-tabbing stuff. And I'm just going to load like an empty scene, basically. Then I'm going to call application.openURL with this URL here. This will launch Parsec. Now your client has to have Parsec installed. If they don't have the Parsec app installed, it's not going to work. So we are going to run it. And then this is a little bit of a hack. So Parsec sometimes, I don't know if it still has the bug, but it had a bug where if you open application.openURL, if Parsec was not already running, it would open it, but not launch. If it was already open, it would launch. So I open it. Then I have a delegate that I have, a coroutine delegate thing that waits for 3 seconds. This is my own like kind of custom code. It waits for 3 seconds and then it opens Parsec again. Hold up, I have nested delegates. So I'm just going to explain what's going on so you don't have to look at the syntax. Basically what I'm doing is open Parsec. Wait a little bit of time, open Parsec again. If it's already open, it won't be bad. If it wasn't open, it would open it, and then the second time it would run the game. And then I put run in background to false, because if the game's running in the background, clicking or playing in Parsec is also going to play in your game at the same time, and audio and that sort of stuff. Okay, so that is this step here. That is have clients run the game. So I go into here and I press this, and we'll see that Parsec opens and then opened again, and now multiplayer game in progress. Oh, and then I go into here. I am able to join and play against myself. Another thing as well is make sure the streamer is not running always, because by default, the object is enabled and it will be running. So you're going to want to only enable the streamer, and this is me literally like toggling the mono behavior script. You only want it to be enabled when a game is hosted. Otherwise, it's going to take off a good chunk of your frame rate in offline play. Okay, so here's just some stuff that I do. So for example, for me, authentication host success. So this is after the ZF browser had been launched and that the user had authenticated. It would call this, and this was that like event system that we had linked. And basically I start Parsec, streamer.startParsec, set that as stream, get the invite URL right away, and then put the game onto the lobby. So that is me pushing to my server. And then I call streamer.hideCursor, and this will make it so that the cursor is invisible, and that's because I am getting the cursor information. I don't want the cursor to be visible on the screen, like for aiming and stuff. We have like our own cursor that we draw. So there's hide and show cursor as well. All right, and taking a look, just to wrap it up, is my assigned guest code. So I just thought to show this. So it's basically the same thing. I have either joystick or mouse and keyboard players, not both. So when I'm assigning the guest to player, I'm always trying to use the same ID, so I'm using the Rewired ID. This is the code for me assigning the controller. So remember how we had it in multi-layers in the other project? Well, here I just put it all in one place. And here is for the controller. Alright, so that should wrap up the tutorial. I hope that this has been helpful. Like I said, I'm not actually affiliated with Parsec. I've just worked closely with them to integrate this into our game as well. And I thought that this tutorial would be helpful. There's tons of documentation, and the people on the Discord are super helpful. But I tend to be a video person, so I hope that this helps out people in the future. If you have any questions, be sure to jump into the Discord. Alright, well, I hope that this has been helpful for someone. If you would like to show your appreciation, you can always invite me to play your game with you on your Parsec Arcade when it's ready. And I wish you all the best of luck in your game-making adventures.